Welcome into Texans Today, everybody. I'm your host, Jeremy Chuggs, and coming up on today's program, the 5 biggest questions around the Texans roster I see during OTAs going into, the dog days of the summer and then, training camp, preseason. It'll be here before you know it. Could the Texans make some additions? Could some guys who didn't even play last year be stepping up? I'll break all that down on today's show. But today's the last day of the month, summertime, vacations, good feeling. But I also know, the focus isn't around the NFL right now. So I'm not saying this is y'all's fault. It may fall on me as well. So I need your help really quick. This is the lowest sub month of the channel so far in 2024. I need 50 more subs to kind of boost it up above February, the shortest month of the year. So help me out. Go down and hit that sub button if you haven't already. Bringing you daily Texans news and rumors videos all year long. Appreciate everybody who has subscribed. And let's get into today's program talking about the biggest roster questions around the Houston Texans. First up, and this is probably the most talked about thing since the NFL draft for the Houston Texans, is who's going to be that cornerback 2 opposite of Derek Stingley Jr. When we look at the depth chart, he's CB1. Right now, at the moment, I have Jeff Okudah at CB2, Kamari Lassiter in the nickel. But if I had to rank the options on the roster right now, it'd probably go something like this for the outside corner position, because Desmond King, I think, is more talented than these two guys as well, but he plays primarily in the nickel. I'm talking about on the outside. My 3 options on the roster would be C.J. Henderson, number 3, Jeff Okudah, number 2, and Kamari Lassiter, number 1. So it's really going to, hinge on how well does Kamari Lassiter play during training camp and preseason, and can he prove that he is a viable option on the outside. If they're not particularly ready to, hand over that option to Kamari Lassiter, the Texans, they also have around $18.5 million in cap space as of right now. So they could go out and get a free agent or possibly trade for another player this offseason. The top free agent options, and the only thing that's really changed on this list is I took Steven Nelson off. I put Akhello Witherspoon on because it seems like Steven Nelson just does not want to be a part of the Houston Texans. He's ripping the front office. He's ripping ownership. He's ripping different parts of the team. There might be a little bit of friction right there. A little bit the same as it was last offseason between him and Nick Caserio. So I don't know if he necessarily returns. So these are my top free agent options: Witherspoon, Stephon Gilmore, and then Xavien Howard. And then if they're looking to trade, these are my options via a trade that are realistic. Obviously, you'd want to trade for a top corner. I don't think Jair Alexander is on the market anymore. So my top 4 options are Tre Brown, James Bradberry, Marshawn Lattimore, and Ambry Thomas. I know it sounds weird, Ambry Thomas being number 1 on my list. And I actually broke all of these guys down on a prior video. If you want to check that out, I'm going to put the link to it right here for you. If you want to check out my prior video on all the cornerback options for the Houston Texans, go check that video out. So breaking all that down, I comes to ask this question: who do you think is going to start opposite of Derek Stingley week 1? If you had to predict it right now, it could be a free agent that you might want the Texans to sign. It could be one of those guys I mentioned in trade or somebody that's on the roster. Predict it right now. If you had to put some money on it, who do you think would be starting opposite of Derek Stingley week 1? Next up, do you keep a fullback? One of my good buddies, another Texans content creator online. If you haven't checked him out, he's with the Texans 22 podcast. His name's BT at Brown Chubby Bear on Twitter. But he talked about on Twitter and on his show, do you keep a fullback? And I've been thinking about it more and more, and I don't know if they necessarily need Andrew Beck on the roster this season. I mean, he brings some special teams, but there's obviously guys who are probably more suited for special teams, like a backup safety or linebacker. They drafted one in the 6th round in Jamal Hill. And with the Texans, emphasis on getting 3 wide receivers and having 2 running backs, and then, this trade that they made as well for Ben Skoranek, where does that leave, the fullback, not even Andrew Beck, just using a fullback on this Texans team? Because Skoranek, he plays wide receiver, he does special teams, but he can also kind of add in as like a tight end, fullback, gadget player as well. And something that I think Bobby Slowick is going to, really put into works this year for the Houston Texans is I think we're going to see a lot more 12 and 11 personnel. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically saying the first number is the amount of running backs. The second number is the amount of tight ends. So 12 personnel would be one running back, 2 tight ends. 11 personnel would be 1 running back, 1 tight end, and then obviously the 3 wide receivers. And I think the Texans are mostly going to go out of 12 and 11 personnel. And I think a lot of 11 personnel in that, because 3 wide receivers, you have 3 great wide receivers. And look at the move they made this offseason, getting Joe Mixon, who back in Cincinnati, they mostly ran out of 11 personnel with 3 wide receivers, and that's where he was really effective in, single back, out of shotgun, running with only maybe 1 tight end, maybe even 4 wide receivers, 4 out. That's where Joe Mixon is very effective. So I could see the Texans just doing away with a fullback and kind of using Skoranek, maybe a tight end, as that pseudo fullback and not having an actual fullback on the roster this season. That leads me to my next question. Biggest Texans roster questions during OTAs. Number 3, who starts at free safety? Obviously, they actually moved up in the 3rd round to draft Kalen Bullock out of USC. I have him as safety number 3 on my safety depth chart right now, behind Jimmy Ward and Jalen Petrie. But I think eventually this is the guy that's going to be taking the starting job at free safety. I mean, he's long, he's lanky, he's really good in coverage on the back end. He's what you want as a center fielder safety option. His biggest, downfalls at USC were his tackling and, short yardage, coming up to the line of scrimmage, which that's not what the Texans want to use him as. They want to use him on the back end, covering the deep ball and making sure there's no long plays on this Texans defense. And that kind of leaves the 2 safeties that started last year, Jalen Petrie and then Jimmy Ward. First up, Jalen Petrie. He was benched towards the end of last year, and he's, playing a lot more in the box. I think he plays better in the box and not, being that free safety, being that guy on the back end. And then same with Jimmy Ward. I mean, I think out of the 2, he's more likely to start at the free safety position, be that guy on the back end. But I think they're going to slowly work in Kalen Bullock if they don't start him week 1 and have him be the starting option. And that leaves, who starts between Jalen Petrie and Jimmy Ward, or do they sometimes run a 3 safety look? I think it's a lot to consider for DeMeco Ryans and this coaching staff on who they're going to start at the 2 safety positions. Now, coming up, I have 2 more Texans roster questions that I have during OTAs, looking at, are they going to make some more moves in free agency, possibly a trade? Do they need to? I'll tell you all that in just a moment. But if you haven't checked out our Fanatics shop with all the brand new Texans hats, it is amazing. If you go to chadsports.com/Texans hats, all these options you see on the right are, is it the right or left of me? Right here. All these options right here are available. Some of them are on sale. And I actually added, there's a lot more new hats that they just dropped. I added a bunch of the new pictures right here. Yeah, there you go. That one, this one's really dope. They have a bunch in the new logos. So go check them out today. A bunch of new options just dropped on the Fanatics website. This link is going to be in the comment section and description of today's video. One more time, it's chatsports.com/Texans hats. Now, looking at the next biggest Texans roster question, who is going to be linebacker number 3? Looking at the Texans depth chart, I really don't know who the 3rd linebacker is. Obviously, the favorite is going to be Henry To'oTo'o, the draft pick out of Alabama last season. But has he proven enough, or is he, good enough to be a starting linebacker in the NFL? DeMeco, he loves his guys from Alabama. Henry To'oTo'o was able to prove a little bit last year, but I don't know if it's necessarily a lock that Henry To'oTo'o is going to be the 3rd linebacker on this Texans team. They made a couple additions in free agency. One that's kind of flew under the radar has been Jacob Phillips, formerly of the Cleveland Browns, a former 3rd-round pick, and he's dealt with back-to-back pectoral injury issues. So his last time playing was in 2022, where he was decent for half the year, 46 tackles, 2 sacks, 2 tackles for loss, and this was for half the season before he got injured and missed the rest of 2022. But he could be an intriguing option for the Texans to be a third linebacker. Another option that they have is they re-signed Neville Hewitt, a mostly special teams option, but before playing with the Texans, he started with the New York Jets and was pretty decent starting for that organization. Could he possibly win a starting spot and be that third linebacker for the Houston Texans? And another option that is really intriguing is Jamal Hill, the Texans' 6th-round pick out of Oregon. A lot of people see him as a special teams ace and a special teams only type of player, but if he impresses, if he's, good in coverage, a former safety at the University of Oregon, could he find his way into that third linebacker spot? So I ask you this. Obviously, Henry Toto is the favorite to win the linebacker 3 spot, but out of these other 3 options, who do you think is the most likely to win linebacker 3? Let me know down in the comments. Is it Jamal Hill, JH, Neville Hewitt, NH, or Jacob Phillips, JP? My last roster question for the Houston Texans is, what's this O-line configuration going to be? And I think we're starting to get our answers throughout OTAs. Jarrett Patterson, I know he's going to be fighting to start at center. He's going to really, push Juice Scruggs to be that starting guy. But at OTAs so far, as we see in the pictures, it looks like they're giving Juice the first shot at being the starting center for this team. So then if Juice is starting at center, that means I think Kenyon Green is going to be the first guy up at left guard. A lot of people have been talking about how good he looks at OTAs and in these practices. Just, his physical stature, how he's, for the first time with the Houston Texans actually healthy, has lost a little bit of weight, gained a little bit of muscle, had all of last year while he was on IR to recover from those injuries and then get in the gym, get stronger, and work on himself. He's going to be probably the starting left guard for your Houston Texans this season. And then at right tackle, Titus Howard, is he going to be good to go? Obviously, only played 7 games last year. He, preseason got injured with that hand, was out for the first number of games, came back in, and then ended up injuring his knee and missing the rest of the season. Is he going to be healthy enough? Is he going to be good enough to start at right tackle this season? Or is there a reason why they drafted Blake Fisher in the 2nd round of this year's draft out of Notre Dame? I mean, he's been a right tackle only at his time at Notre Dame for the past couple of seasons. Is he the option at right tackle? Is he the guy who they're going to start over Titus Howard? Because I don't know if he's going to be 100% during training camp, during the preseason this year. And if he's not, Blake Fisher, he might get a chance to start for your Houston Texans. That's all I have for you on today's show. As always, hit me up on Twitter at Jeremy Chuggs for more Texans news and rumors content, the latest around the NFL. Also tweet about the NBA, pop culture, a number of things. Me and Jack, we love ourselves some TV shows, movies. Really excited for some of the movies coming up, Jack. I mean, the House of Dragons Season 2, The Boys Season 2. A lot of good watching this summer. Follow along at Jeremy Chuggs for all my thoughts on that. Sorry about the end of show rambling, but you made it to the end of the show, so obviously we're having a good time. As always, hit that sub button for daily Texans news and rumors content. Trying to make sure that this isn't the lowest sub month of the year. So I need 50 of y'all to go down and hit that sub button so I can show my bosses, hey, Texans fans, even in the dog days, even in the slowest days of the year, they're here to represent and they're here to stay. So go down and hit that sub button.